is the 11 plus, 48%. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Travis Hoffman. I serve as our North Dakota State University and University of Minnesota Extension Sheep Specialist. I'm excited that you've joined us for our value-added wool webinar this evening. Certainly a kind of a big thought process that I've wanted to kind of identify and highlight some of our players here in both presenters from Minnesota and from North Dakota. So we will have a trio of individuals that will be joining us. We will have Maddie Barch, the president of the Three Rivers Fiber Shed. We will have Teresa Bentz, owner of Get Bentz Farm and Badger Face Fiber, and Jesse Munson, owner of Yarn Factory LLC. So a little bit of today's ground rules is please, again, provide where you're joining us from in our chat box. The other portion is that we will have you put your questions in the chat box. If we can fit those in and they align with where our presentation is, we will catch some of those questions along the way and keep it interactive for you. If not, we will gather those together, and we are planning for 15 to 20-minute presentations from each of our speakers, and then allow the flexibility for question and answer at the end of it. And so we hope that we inspire some thought and get the opportunity to be driven to discover and to extend knowledge and change lives. So I'm excited that you've joined us, and I look forward to the interaction for our value-added wool webinar. And we're going to lead it off with Maddie. Again, Maddie joins us from the Three Rivers Fiber Shed. And Maddie, you can share your screen and introduce yourself. And we look forward, and she'll have a little bit of a joint presentation with Teresa Bentz as well. So thanks again for everybody for joining us on a lovely evening here in March of 2024. Maddie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Travis. Hey, y'all, I'm Maddie. I live in Minneapolis, farm in Northfield at Get Bentz Farm. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit kind of to set the stage for some of the partnerships that Get Bentz Farm and specifically Teresa and I have been working on, starting with the concept of a fiber shed, which some may be familiar with, but basically a fiber shed is the concept similar to like a watershed where it's a strategic geography. And instead of thinking about our waterways, we're thinking about bringing in awareness and connectivity to our natural textile resource base. So these are all over the globe. There's probably a chapter if you're not in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, a little bit of the Dakotas. And I think we don't go down to Illinois, but there's a group there. So they're all over the world. They're in like 50 different countries. And so ours, the Three Rivers Fiber Shed, was named after the Mississippi, the Minnesota, and the St. Croix rivers. And what we're working on doing is within 175 miles from Minneapolis, we work to enhance and build stewardship in our soil health, as well as bringing awareness to the textiles that can be made locally. So what that looks like on a map, here's our very, very accurate illustrated watercolor version. You can see the cities are kind of in the center, but we go up to Duluth, encompass Duluth. We go down, we make sure we cover Decorah, Iowa. If you've ever been to the Norwegian, the Vesterheim Museum, very fabulous textile collection. And we include a lot of Western Wisconsin, where there's a lot of smaller sheep farms. And so what we really are focused on is asking and helping educate people. We're a 501c3, helping them think about what you're wearing today and which carbon pool provides your clothing. So is it from microplastics and petroleum-based products, or is it from natural fibers like wool, alpaca, linen, hemp, things where we can manage the way we graze so we sequester carbon. And so we also think about like natural dyes as part of that too. So what sort of crops can we put into rotation that also kind of help bolster this local textile economy that isn't reliant on petroleum products or labor really, really far overseas that can happen here locally. So just very briefly, this is like what our current textile systems look like. So to zoom way out from if you have sheep or goats or alpaca, kind of at that beginning start point, right? But this is to look all the way out to that big kind of linear system. And so the way our clothing is traditionally made right now, at least for the last few years, has been very linear, very much based in the oil industry, chemical industry. It's predominantly labor overseas. There's a lot of pollution, there's a lot of labor issues, there are human rights issues, there's all sorts of things, right? And it's creating clothing that's really disposable. And consumers don't really know what's in their clothes, let alone who made it, where it came from, what it's good for, if it's right for the thing, the activity they bought it for. And it's really disposable. It's not the way that we used to make clothing and the way that we view making clothing now, which, unlike this linear system, we look at it from a very circular way of being. So there's no waste in the system. If you've heard of like cradle to cradle, that's kind of the concept that we as an organization strive for. And we focus on the soil health is where everything builds from. So the way we graze our sheep, our alpacas, the way we grow our cotton, our bast fibers, our dye plants, using local manufacturing, small mills, medium-sized mills, things that you can use solar panels, reclaiming your water, using chemicals that aren't harsh or harmful for marine and aquatic life. Doing all these things, bringing labor back to domestic manufacturing and using all of those skill sets to create, clothing that's ready to wear. So like you would go to a store and buy it, but it would be like Minnesota grown wool, spun and woven in Wisconsin, and then there it would be on the shelf for you. And what we do also in this is it's a lot about educating consumers. Most people have no idea that wool comes from sheep. Some people do, but a lot of people we engage with have no idea, especially like in the city. And so it's really about helping connect people to what their clothing, what and where and who and all those pieces. And part of that is also taking care of your clothing. We emphasize mending, repair, sewing buttons back on, all those sorts of things. And at the end of the life cycle of these garments, because they're all natural fibers, natural dyes, you can compost them. And those garments, so those sweaters, mittens, socks, you name it, that are made from all these natural fibers can be broken up, put back onto pastures, rangeland, and that will feed right back into the soil health. And so as a group, we focus on education through sliding scale classes. We do blog posts, storytelling, year-long challenges. And again, it's really, we're really kind of the conduit between shepherds and fiber growers and artists and dye growers and the public, to help them connect, to see themselves, to hear those stories. Stories change people's minds and hearts on things. And so it's really about creating relationships, creating stories of what's going on in our communities. We do a lot with community building with our steward membership program. And so we also partner with all of the shepherds who are in our area who want to be a part of our program. We partner with designers and makers who want to source locally and help them figure out how to navigate the supply chain, because it's not set up to be easy or transparent. And we welcome everyone to join and do mutual aid as well to offer local fiber and local dyes for people who can't necessarily afford it. Maybe they're used to a price point that's a lot lower, like at Joann's. And so we want them to feel the difference of using local fiber. We want them to feel the difference of a non-superwash. We want them to feel that. And so we provide scholarships so people can engage with that. Some of the projects, this is what our steward pages look like. So we have a directory where people can go to find exactly the type of sheep they're looking for, the dye they're looking for. If people are passionate about this, this is where they go to find that information, and we help guide people as well. So again, we're kind of a conduit to help connect all of these smaller shepherds and farms, kind of pull them together so we're stronger together. And some of the kind of challenges we do, and then I'll pass it to Teresa to talk a bit about Get Bent's Farm and then kind of one of the projects we worked on. We do things where we invite people in to do like a soil to sock challenge, where it is from 1 year start to the end to make a pair of socks using local fiber. You can start with yarn, you can start with, roving if you're a hand spinner, You can start with a freshly shorn fleece off of a sheep if you want to, and wash it and go the whole way through. Anything. It's just inviting people to get to know your farmer, get to know who's growing your fiber, to make those connections, to support them through purchasing their yarns, through their fibers, and also just to get to know just to get to know who's there. I think it's not always apparent to everyone who's all involved in all the pieces. And so Teresa is a really great example of someone who is involved as one of our stewards, also as a mill, and then also in many other ways. So that's what we are here for. Our chapters are, again, all over the world, and the emphasis is on we work locally with who's around us to try to lift everybody up and to create opportunities for people to flourish, especially around the wool economy, because that has been so tanked. And so one of the things we'll talk about, I'll pass it to Teresa here in just a sec, but we're going to talk about one of our projects, which was mapping Minnesota's wool economy. And so I'll pass it to her to talk a little bit about our farm, and then we'll hop into that.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. Well, I am Teresa Benz, and I run Get Benz Farm with my husband. We are located just outside of Northfield, Minnesota, kind of overlooking the Cannon Valley up on the hillside. We raise we started with Icelandic sheep because they were considered the perfect homesteading sheep. And then we've moved on to other breeds, mostly for wool production, but also for meat production. Those are my two big industries, are wool and meat. So we raise Cheviots and Icelandics and some Jacobs and a couple misfit Soye sheep, which are a really old breed from Scotland. And then we also have a small woolen mill, which here's some fun pictures of all that good stuff. So on our farm, we do a lot of education as well as milling the fiber into an end product. And so we do like a year-long experience where people who don't live in agriculture and who don't have sheep can come to a shear day and can learn how to skirt wool and learn how to process that into an end product. And then we also have Maddie's dye garden on the farm, and we host monthly U-pick, so people can come and pick their dye stuff at the farm, and then also maybe pick out some yarn or roving and other products that we create. So here's the pictures of the mill. So I just kind of went out on a whim one day and decided I was going to do this, which is really fun. It's been the most fun I've ever had. I purchased my first machines in 2019, and then added onto the mill to be able to spin fibers into an end product of yarn. I decided after we had conducted the study, mapping Minnesota wool's economy, that my focus of the mill was going to be different than other mills in the area. I apprenticed under Rachel at Rachel Alpaca, and she's a very traditional mill where customers send in their raw products, she mills it into an end product, and then that end product goes back to the customer, and then they can sell it. And I decided with everything that I was going to be different, and that I would buy wool and alpaca and mohair and cashmere. I would buy that from other producers in the area to try to bring to fiber artists a local yarn, kind of a centralized local yarn. And that's what I've been doing, and it's been really great. So there's a fun picture of my first skein of what I call WHAM yarn. It's wool, alpaca, and merino, and I think it's just the best blend ever. And I work with a bunch of designers who write amazing patterns that go really well with my wool. And then we also do some natural dyeing with it. But the whole purpose of what we're doing is to make it traceable. So if a customer says, "Hey, Teresa, I really love this skein of yarn. Where did it come from?" I could say, "Oh, that came from my friend down in Rochester who raises amazing Corriedale, and I get his clip every year." So over the last couple of years, I've grown and developed some really great connections with local shearers, And then a couple of kind of specific farms that grow the type of wool or fibers that I'm really looking for. And then every year they know that I'm going to come on shear day and grab that clip, and I'm going to pay them what they want for it, which is usually about the price of shearing. And that's kind of a nice thing that I can do for them, because I'm making a product that has a lot of value now. And that's kind of the gist of what I'm doing. And so let's talk about this study. So me and Maddie decided let's take a look at what Minnesota wool economy really looked like, because you hear bits and pieces of it in the world of fiber. When you go to different fiber shows, you see lots of vendors who have a lot of end products, but you also see hand dyers who have dyed products that come from other countries. Sometimes like the yarn isn't sourced locally, and all of that. And so we were wondering, who raises the sheep in Minnesota? Where is it raised? And what kind of breeds are we raising? And then really, what are they doing with their wool? Because we've watched the wool industry just kind of tank down, as many of the shepherds if they sell to the wool pool. We've watched that industry kind of fall apart in the last, really the last decade, if not more. And we've watched a lot of wools that really have a lot of value in other aspects just kind of, be listed as not good wool or like low quality. So that's the gist of it. What we did is we interviewed different shepherds. We had a couple surveys that went out. We were really happy because we got to work with RSDP on this, and they did a lot of the development of the informational products and helped us kind of get this out at a larger scale. And then they also helped us with a written report. And so this is what the map really showed. It showed kind of that our sheep farms are pretty small. We used to have more sheep farms in the state, and now we have less sheep farms, and they're not as big as you would see out west. We don't have, hundreds and hundreds of sheep on the land. These are small shepherds with small flocks, and a lot of the flocks are diverse. There's a lot of diversity in the breed of sheep that they're coming out with, and they're breeding. And then
I just threw this one in. Yeah, I just threw this one in, Teresa. Just so you see where folks responded. We know that there's folks based on this one up here and over here who have sheep farms, but they did not respond to our survey. So this is just showing you that what we heard from is kind of all in this core area. So if we were to do this survey again, it'd be really interesting to find more folks in those areas to hear kind of their perspectives. But Teresa, you were a perfect segue into the sheep breed results. So if you want to take it from here.
Yeah. So this really shocked me that Icelandic and Shetland were like the two big guys. But if you go back to that map, it makes a lot of sense why these guys are the big guys in these areas, because this is, kind of central around the metro area. Land's a little bit more expensive if you're going to have land for grazing. And then obviously you have your Dorset, which are fantastic meat breeds. I really love Dorset wool. I could talk about it all day and how amazing it is. Cheviot, I love Cheviots because I have them too. Rambouillet, and then the hair sheep, the Katahdins. Those were kind of the top breeds in the state. And to go back to not getting as many surveys, we did run this study kind of during that off season for shepherds, but also when shepherds are working the hardest during lambing season. So it could be that. So Maddie, I will let you take it from here if you want to talk about the barriers of selling this.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So kind of as Teresa said, we wanted to know who and where and what type of sheep, but also we wanted to understand what were folks doing with their wool. As you're probably aware, or maybe you're experiencing yourself, oftentimes it can be challenging to know what to do with the wool you have, especially as it starts to pile up in a garage or like a pole barn or a shed somewhere. And so kind of unsurprisingly, low financial market reward was the biggest issue for shepherds in knowing what to do with their wool. Another thing was cost of processing and marketing difficulties. So I feel like, again, not shocking information, probably like partially why you're here is to talk about these things. And I think it is just again to show that like the milling infrastructure that Teresa has kind of stepped in to fill in our area is really meeting this need. Where I mean, if you look at wool is not my focus, is like the fourth largest like response to this. So that being said, all those folks probably still have wool. They have meat breeds that have wool if they're not hair, and so could there be opportunities, a financial opportunity for them with the kind of milling that Teresa's doing that does add value to what they're doing, if only to pay their shearing costs, so that is a part of it. So then one of the things we also looked at was the products that folks sell. And so we saw that most folks are selling both wool and meat, wool being the second one, meat being third, and then kind of a mix of some of the smaller things, wool products, things like that. But a lot of dual, kind of like we saw dual purpose breeds. So of course it makes sense that we have dual purpose kind of as far as products folks are trying to sell. So, and that is it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we're a little bit early. So Teresa, if there's anything else you wanted to add, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to Travis.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I wanted to add, just, and I forgot to mention this before, is that as a shepherd and somebody who I really got into just raising sheep, and I knew that their meat was delicious. And so that was what my main focus was as a farm. It was hard for me to break into the selling of the fiber. It was hard for me to find somebody to mill it, hard for me to market it. And so I can understand why some shepherds who have, different sheep breeds don't want to do that end product piece, which is where I kind of step into the picture and buy it.
And I guess I would just add to that too, because we do have a few seconds. Like from a standpoint of being an organization that helps facilitate these connections between partners in a textile economy, it is really helpful to have somebody like Teresa, because if a designer of menswear, which this is real life example, there's a menswear designer in Minneapolis who wants to make wool trench coats using local wool. And he wants a large enough quantity. He's okay with some like kind of mixing in color, doesn't mind. But a lot of individual shepherds can't meet the amount he needs to have woven into fabric, because these are like long trench coats. So, but Teresa, because she's getting these bigger clips, she's blending, she's making these unique yarns. It's ideal for a designer who wants to experiment with kind of more bespoke local clothing. And that's where we come in to help kind of create those connections so that he can then access that and understand, okay, so I can get wool locally from someone like Teresa and still have that story that the customer who wants to pay that value add price, that high premium for local design, local fiber, wants to know and is crucial for marketing that product. So yeah, just to throw that in there as well.
I think we're going to take at least one quick question here, because it's just kind of infrastructure that I think aligns well. You might have saw that initially in our chat box, and just talked about some of the either frustrations and or market opportunity of just only U.S. manufacturing. You talked a little bit there about the wool trench coats, but the inquiry comes of, do you see a day that public funding, such as through our farm bill, as the assistance, where we might get some infrastructure support along with kind of our domestic product in comparison to like there is some in our dairy industry? What's your thoughts on that, ladies?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So this is something that I've really struggled with, just because I see there's such a tremendous need in agriculture, for more infrastructure and for grant funding and additional loans. Like getting a loan for a mill can be kind of tricky depending on your area and who you're working with. So yes, I think so on my end, and what me and Maddie have really done is we've kind of aligned ourselves with the Farmers Union and you know, those kind of organizations to try to get them to push for this. We've just submitted a grant to look at landscape fabric made out of wool using a needle filter that we purchased. So I think that we're in the initial stages of it, and since I'm perpetually like optimistic, I really feel like this could be the way that we go, with more advocacy and more people telling the story of why this is important. So keep on it. You know, I would say to everybody, like, ask those questions and ask about local wool and reach out to us and try to get involved, and that should really help it.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I think the only thing that I would just add to that is in areas where I've seen like larger infrastructure coming in, so whether scouring facilities, things where there's a bottleneck, where there's many, I know someone said in the chat there's like 200 mills. I was part of a national mill inventory survey that an organization did, I think it was like in 2017, and we found tons of mills all over. But the problem is a lot of them have really specific like staple lengths, quantities they can do. It takes up to a year, maybe there's a year wait list. So that being said, to get to a point where we have ready to wear items that people can readily purchase, that's a different kind of scale that, like Therese is saying, I think there's more feasibility studies being done. And also I would say connecting, the groups that have done it well have connected with like their municipalities, their city councils, getting the government, like all of those sorts of things, getting environmental groups involved, because it is also an environmental issue. So I think it's when you pull all of these big groups together that have sway power, especially with policy and things like that, that's where you can pull in as an economic development opportunity for your region that really plays to a lot of different groups' boxes, which is really important. And I think we'll bring some of those big funds to make kind of everybody rise to the surface.
Thank you, Maddie. Appreciate that. I think there's some great questions in the chat box, so feel free to keep putting those in, and also some connections and some ideas that plenty of people have put in there, and focusing on what they have available and how to make those connections. And so that's a great segue, because we're going to allow Jessie, because she does bring people together, as do Maddie and Teresa as well. So props to Jessie as I hand this over. Like, well done on the promotion there with the big banner behind you. You know, we got wool hanging. All right, you're just living the dream. Okay, so Jessie, the floor is yours, and you can share your screen. Really appreciate you joining us, and I know that it's again been a great idea of myself of trying to pull some of this together, and look forward to your thoughts on what we've got, and to highlight the Yarn Factory LLC. Jessie?
All right, here we go. I think I got it up here. So we are Yarn Factory. I'm Jessie. And a little bit about us quick is we were founded as Yarn Factory in 2020, and we're based in North Dakota. Yarn Factory is an artisan fiber mill. We do custom processing for animal fibers for farms across the country. Previous to the fiber mill, I worked at another fiber mill for 5.5 years before that. So we've been in the processing business myself for 10 years now, which has been a while. We are located just south of Fargo in North Dakota. So in that really southeast corner, kind of close, almost to the fiber shed area there, but not quite. We're a little bit out of the territory for you guys. But we also do process batches as small as 3 pounds, because we wanted to give fiber producers more control over their end product, and it kind of gives a better end-to-end traceability by animal, if that's something a farm wants, especially with, as we saw in those surveys coming in early on here with the webinar, we saw a lot of small farmers for sheep or goats or other fiber animals. So that can be very important for them. Currently, our turnaround time is under 4 months, but as shearing season progresses, that does increase a little bit. But we try to stay as low of a turnaround as possible so that farmers can get their product back, because that is what you need to be able to make money. So that's kind of where we're at with a quick little history about Yarn Factory, and then a little bit about us who work at Yarn Factory. Again, I'm Jessie, and we have the nearly 10 years experience with raw animal fiber that we process into roving and yarn for farms across the country. Dirk, my husband, he joined us full-time at Yarn Factory in last summer, 2023, and assists with the various stages of processing, also does a lot of the social media and marketing. So it takes a village to run a small business, of course. So that's where we're at with Yarn Factory. We've also been alpaca owners since 2014, and we have usually about 25 animals, 25 alpacas in Galchute, North Dakota, which is just 10 minutes from Colfax, where the fiber mill is located, but all within that 30 minutes south of Fargo area. So not too far from that metro. And then as Yarn Factory, we, like I said, working with processor or working with fiber farms across the country. Right now we have 22 states covered as far as farms that have processed with us from those states, and over 110 active fiber farmers that are processing with us in at least the last 3 years. So we're actually bringing fiber from your barns, the fiber farm, to Yarn and sending it back. So we custom process, working with the farmer to figure out what they want, what they need, and literally shipping it back and forth. Most of our customers do come from the North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin area, kind of the Midwest. But as you can see on the map here, it does spread out a little bit, just kind of depending on what a customer wants. They find what they need and the help along the way. And then we can get what they need for them so they can to sell their product. All right, so real quick, what does a fiber mill do? We make yarn, roving, cloud, and some other fiber products or finished products. For example, hats, socks, dryer balls, etc., from raw fiber. Our mill processes alpaca, Surrey, and Ukiah types, wools, Angora, both rabbit and Angora goats for mohair, bison, and other animal fibers. Different animal fibers from all kinds of different livestock. And then we also provide guidance to fiber producers. So we have a lot of people that just aren't sure what they might want or what would be the best use for their fiber. And that is something that we would sit down and help them with. That's something that was important to me when we started it, to make sure that you're getting the best use for your fiber, and not all fibers process this end result. Like we talked about earlier here in the webinar, the different breeds of sheep being used for different end products. There's a use for all the different fibers. It just might be not exactly what you think, or something that needs to be done in a special way to be able to make that profit off of it. So that's something that we are willing to help with as well. All right, so we make yarn and more, but yarn is the most common output since it's the base for pretty much all other finished products. If you're looking at any kind of garment, whether it's a hat, socks, sweaters, blankets, it all starts with yarn. So that's something that is very important in the process, from wool, different fibers, into any end product. You're going to have to usually make yarn, unless you're looking at felts and some of that sort of stuff. But of course, we focus on the yarn. And then you have to kind of think of yarn as the flower of the textile world, kind of a fun trick we like to say, where you're taking the wheat, turning it into flour, and then it turns into bread or to cereal or whatever end food product might be. The yarn and flour are very similar in that sense. All right, so some of the finished products that we can either help with, or that are really common in the fiber world, as most of you will probably know: dryer balls, socks, hats. So in addition to roving and yarn, which we all kind of think about when you're having fiber processed from your smaller farm or even a larger farm, but then trying to find another use for it past yarn. Dryer balls, you can use the raw fiber from. You could use the lower quality fiber if it's not super soft, or it has some more hairs in it, or maybe it's a little bit dirtier. Sometimes that's a good avenue to go towards. And then socks, of course, are really popular because you pretty much every person needs some socks. They're warm, they help thermoregulate, all that sort of thing. And then hats as well, very common place when you're looking at wool and fiber products. Hats are a common one. All right. And then profiting from your fiber. Of course, the more you invest, the more your return is going to be. So that includes money and time. You got to put a little bit of effort in to be able to get more out from these crops. All right, I'll just scoop this here. All right, so fiber processing, our mill charges on incoming weight, and some mills are a little bit different, but for what we're doing, this is where we get our information, of course. Processing costs vary by yarn size. So smaller, thinner yarns cost a little bit more than the thicker yarn, just because of the time processing takes for those individual yarns, but it averages about $36 per pound. And then of course, finished product labor is between $5 to $7 per unit. That's if you're making a hat or some of those other finished products we saw on the previous screen, in addition to the yarn. And what we found is wool has an average loss of about 40%. And that can vary a little bit too, depending on how dirty a fleece is, how much lanolin or grease is in that wool, and what type of fiber it is. We usually see about 9.6 ounces per pound that becomes final product. So the per pound incoming weight. And then pre-skirting fleeces also will lower the loss rate. So if you're sending in fleece to whatever kind of mill it is, and it's dirty, it's full of hay, and you didn't take any tags off it or skirt any chunks out of it, you're gonna pay for that in loss right off the top. So if you're able to pull that stuff out ahead of time, if you're sending it to a mill or something, then you're saving yourself money for a little bit of work up front, just kind of checking things over. And the average cost of processed ounce, so after loss, we see about $3.75. And that's the cost that you have into an ounce of fiber. All right, and here we have a really fun bar chart that we're trying to kind of explain the margins per step, which hopefully will be helpful for people to see kind of a visual. And a quick explanation of the chart on the bars go up for the margins of per pound incoming. So raw wool, if you're just selling raw wool, you're not going to see a lot of margin off of that, $0 to $1 per pound, just kind of depending on what the prices are. And then looking at wool pricing using like the USDA report, that's kind of where we get those numbers from. And then clean wool, you see $2 to $4. So a little bit more if the wool is scoured. And that's all something that is charted on the USDA reports that come out, I believe, weekly. And then we see next to that yarn, and we have two different numbers here. The retail price on the bottom there in the white says retail $25 to $30. That's what you, as a farm or a store, whatever retail market they're in, that's what it will be in yarn cost or yarn retail price. And then the yarn cost for a producer would be the $6.25 to $15 there at the top of the bar. And then there is a little bit of variable there as well. And that depends on sizing of yarn, how much goes into that yarn as well. And then we have the hat section. So the more work you're putting into the different products, the more margins you're going to see in return. So a hat retails $35 to $40 here on the bottom, and there is a $9.25 to $18 input into that hat. So the margin increases there over yarn. And of course, those both yarn and hats much higher than selling raw wool or clean wool. Socks, you do see a little bit of a drop in the margin there, the $5 to $10 range when the retail for $25 to $30, just because of the different variables that socks have over a hat there. So all these numbers are based on wool in this example. If you have fibers like alpaca or even blends of different fibers, those can command higher prices or a little bit different pricing as well. And of course, with alpaca fiber, there is no chart that we can go to like the wool pricing chart. So that does vary a lot since there is no commercial market in the US for that. But we do see a typical price of about $6 to $15 per pound off of the animal. And of course, that does vary as well. And then again, cleaner fleeces with lower loss can only boost these prices. So these are just kind of a realistic look at it. It's not a everything has to be perfect to hit these prices. It's a very realistic approach as far as what these numbers can mean for a producer. And then, of course, past these items, there are other items that you could talk about, like sweaters or blankets and that sort of thing. And that could be a higher price point, but it also takes more time in fiber to get into make into that. So sometimes it doesn't make sense, the cost that you put into it for the retail market that you can get. All right, there's also alternative fiber uses. So in addition to the socks, hats, yarn, the other things that we see a lot of, there's some of the unique premium products that could also be part of it. The dog leashes, that's something new that we've had some clients interested in as a way to use some of the lower quality fibers, horse reins, saddle flocking, that sort of thing. Some of the fibers that we don't want to see into yarn that would be less ideal for next to skin textiles, you can still make into a cool product and have a variation for a product lineup as well. And then another option, we briefly spoke some of the lower quality fibers, the dryer balls, and then quilting fill. So quilting batting, that can be wool, alpaca, or a mix of fibers, and that can be very popular as well. So there's some alternative fiber uses for some of these fibers as well. And then we try to assist producers with a model that helps them for their farm with what fiber that they have. And if there's something new that they might want to look into, that's something we can look at input cost versus expected retail value for them so that they can find the best use for their fiber and be able to profit the best with those products. All right, and a question we get a lot, of course, is it cost effective to process my fiber? And the short answer is yes, but it requires clean fleeces, a quality fiber, finding your market, and patience. These things do take time, whether you're growing the wool, you're having them sheared, and then you have to get that fiber processed. So if you're sending it away and you have to wait a couple of months for it, and then you get yarn back, and then you have to make something out of it after that, it does take some time. So you do have to be patient. That's one thing you have to, the timeline of everything. All right, oh, sorry, I'm gonna go back here real quick. I just wanna talk about, you don't always have to process everything at first either. So even if you have a flock of 50 sheep, you can start with 10 fleeces, and if they're each 12 pounds each, that's 120 pounds of fiber and about 72 pounds after the loss. So that's still extra margin that you are gaining on average of about $765 at just the yarn stage. So that does add up quite a bit, and that can increase profit margin. And all of a sudden you have $72 to $129 per head that you're increasing your margins on. All right. Fiber processing starts on the farm. There's a mill saying we like to say garbage in, garbage out. So if you have a really dirty fleece with a lot of debris prior to shearing and prior to skirting, and you send it, it's not going to turn out very well. But if you can remove the debris prior to shearing or skirting afterwards, the best that you can, that does increase the cleanliness of whatever final product that you are working towards. And if you skirt your fleeces, that will save money for you, better quality end product, but also don't be worried about over skirting. We've seen farms that they'll skirt until there's barely anything left, and you took a 10-pound fleece, all of a sudden it's 3 pounds. You threw a lot of profit in the garbage. So try to skirt a little bit, but also know that the machines do some work and help kind of get out some of that debris as well. All right, finding your market. So there's a lot of different ways to sell your wool product, your fiber product. You know, if you could sell it to co-op or just selling it outright for those lower margin options, you can sell it to hand spinners, processors, all those different options. But if you're getting it made into product or into yarn or some sort of processing along the way, it does open up more options for you, different markets. We've seen a lot of people have success with their farm stores. That can be a boost if they're doing any sort of agritourism, having a store on your farm, whether it's a small shed or even a larger store, those are options as well. Having different services where people are invited to your farm, like hip camp or harvest hosts. Those are different ways to drive traffic, and they're free. You can sign up for them as a farm, try those out. They have to have usually about, I think it's $30 to $50 they're required to purchase from your farm in order to stay there. So those are kind of programs to look into. And then the hip camp one does have a liability option, insurance option for you to help cover anything if you don't have some of the agritourism insurance on your farm directly. In North Dakota, we do luck out a little bit. We have agritourism laws that do minimize liability issues. So depending on what state you're in, look into that too. That might be something that you already have in place. Like I said, the hip camp does host liability, has host liability insurance as well. Then another thing to look at, local markets, local yarn stores. We can also do online, Etsy, Facebook, your own store, whether you just do your own website, online store. And when I say local markets, it doesn't have to be just fiber-based markets. It doesn't have to be fiber festivals. It can be your local farmers market. It can be the community center get together in the fall. Any of those types of markets, we have found that sometimes fiber items sell really well when you're the only fiber producer there, instead of being at a fiber festival when there is 10 of you. So it just kind of depends on the different market, what you're interested in. That'll vary too, depending on sales, depending on the sales amount for you and the foot traffic that does come into those markets. But online is always an option. That gives you a way to be able to sell while staying home and on the farm where you need to tend to your animals. And then we also get a question about pricing. That's one of the most common things. Well, what should I sell my yarn for? What should I sell the hat for? And you have to remember and appreciate your value as a producer. You're not a big box store like a Walmart or a Joann's or something like that. So you can't use their pricing in those retail markets to price your own goods. You need to remember all the work that you've put in, the steps that took it to get there, the fact that you are a local market for some of these people, and some of that pricing has to be reflected in that. And then another important thing we like to share is people want to know your story. And that's kind of part of the charm for them, is to see that connection to the animal, have a connection with you or the animal or the processing chain. And then that also adds value to it. So always remember that the value as a producer, having that story can make the difference sometimes between a sale and not having a sale. All right. And then speaking of sales, we also like to talk about if you have a higher price point, you can always have a sale. You don't have to keep that price forever. So you could always say, you know, this is a little bit high, it's not selling, we want to move some product. you can have a little sale and reduce the price, but you can't ask someone to pay more after they've already purchased the product. So you want to make sure you price it accordingly, and you can always come lower if it needs to. All right. There we go.
Outstanding. Thank you very much, Jesse, for your thoughts on that. One quick question for you, Jesse. There was a tremendous amount of dialogue in our chat box, so I appreciate everyone that's joined us, and we've had over 120 participants here. But Jesse, you were even answering some questions, so I don't know if Dirk is hiding out in the corner or answering those as you're rolling. But I was super impressed with the multitasking, if that's the case. But whatever it may be.
You might have been doing that without me knowing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm convinced, it was almost like ventriloquism right there, because you kept rolling, and yet the thought process of under your guidance was helping us out. So I'm gonna aim to again, we had so much comments and so much input that we greatly appreciate that. And so if we do miss something on there, feel free to put it on there again so that we can catch some of the questions. But one still came early in our conversation. I think it's a great one for all of our colleagues here. And it's truthfully, again, connecting the dots. And so an individual says, as an indie dyer, I struggle to find locally sourced yarns to dye. Yet it's easy to find the bare yarns that aren't local, such as Peruvian. There seems to be a disconnect. I'd much rather work with the local yarn for so many reasons. And so, again, that's why we're having tonight's venture of pulling this together. But what would be your advice for connecting the dyers to our local farmers and mills? And so that's actually for all three of our trio of speakers.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, and then I think Teresa and Jesse, I'm sure you have some good thoughts on that. I mean, if you have like a fiber shed chapter in your area, that's a great place to find out who's growing wool or alpaca or mohair that you want to work with locally, who's getting it processed into yarn, and also to find out kind of like what mills are in your area, because it could be a really great way to partner with a mill and do more kind of like a large order of them, so the price goes down for you, because obviously that makes it it's more expensive if you're buying it retail, right? And then you're dyeing it, so you're adding that price on top of it. So if there's a way that you can kind of, maybe it's a collaboration with you and a shepherd, where then it's like both of you split it. And I know, Teresa, you've done that before. So yeah, if you want to share on that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I found a good market is different indie dyers will reach out to me, and we will design a yarn that works really well with what you like to dye and kind of your market. So I've worked a lot with Sam from Lavender Loon and a variety of other people, and we'll make kind of low. So the thing when you look at like a mill spun yarn or a local yarn is that it is very seasonal and it is in small supply. So even if I can make Sam or a different indie dyer 200 skeins of yarn, that might be all that we can do during that one batch run. But that also puts demand on the customers to buy at that time. So my advice would be to reach out to mills, reach out to shepherds and other indie dyers and see if anybody else is sourcing local. And then obviously the fiber sheds, that's a good place to start too. And Jesse, do you have anything to add?
I think you guys pretty much covered it. Yeah, reaching out to any local people around you, whether it's a farm or a mill or even the yarn store, just to see who's in your area and kind of get those connections made.
And I'm excited that we have a national and, in fact, an international audience. But to be more Minnesota-centric, there is, of course, our Shepherd's Harvest Festival that is May 10, 11, and 12. So again, that's connecting the dots, and I know that plenty of the people that are either a part of this or part of our fiber world will be there and can connect with some of the things that are going on as well. I'm gonna, Jesse, there's a good one on here on just wool processing. So it said, kind of some of the advancements. And so I think that you've seen some. And in fact, a couple things, I'll transition a little bit, that when we think about it again from a commercial wool industry, okay, at the largest end, and that's simply not the focus that we had for the direction of tonight's webinar. But one of the things that is huge in terms of making next of skin fabric is the super wash system, and that came up a little bit in some of the documents and the discussion, and that's able to make those fibers just a little bit shinier to be able to use. And of course, it takes some of those finer fibers. Maybe, again, it takes when we pull some of the yarns together, like I heard when you had merino and alpaca and lots of different things of differences on the fibers that may or may not be similar in terms of micron or truthful diameter and truthfully functionality. But that was a long lead in, Jesse, for what have you seen in improvements or changes of our fibers just in generality? And maybe one thing to touch on is the differences of fiber diameter and practicality or functionality of them as well. And I'll open that one up for all the trio, but I'll let Jesse start.
Sure. So yeah, superwash is a process that can be done, but it's not really done in the smaller markets. One, it's really cost prohibitive to do batches, and it's not great for the environment because you're stripping down part of the fiber, and a lot of times it's putting some sort of plastic like polymer on it, which is what makes it machine washable and convenient, but can be a little bit harmful in some of the practices that to be able to create that. But as far as some of the advancements of what we're seeing, I'm seeing uniformity come in a lot bigger play. So if you have one fleece and it has, we'll talk microns if people are familiar with that. If you have 18 micron over a handful of fleece, and then the rest of it all of a sudden is up to 25, that's a really low uniform fleece, right? So that can change. Processing would be handled with that particular fleece. But if you're able to get the uniformity where you're seeing more of a, everything comes out averaged about 20 microns, all of a sudden that makes a lot smoother processing for that fiber, and also uniformity in staple length. That's another thing that we are seeing improvements in that. But of course, depending on the animal that it comes from or the type of animal or breed of sheep, those can all still be improved, of course, as we work for breeding a little bit of the uniformity, staple length, and micron. That would be helpful. But micron wise, we start to see under 18 microns becomes really difficult to process and is really time consuming. And you do see the margins change on that. The profitability actually will go down just because of the time and effort and increased costs to get a product made out of that. The sweet spot we like, at least, and what we see the smoothest processing from is that 20 to 25 micron mark. So that's a really good average if you're wanting next to skin products made out of it. Somewhere in that, what a lot of people, at least in the alpaca world, we call it grade 2. It does change depending on what charts you look at, but that's the sweet spot. And then of course you start to go over 25, that's where you see fibers start to feel prickly or itchy, some people will say, but those are still usable in different sense. You just might change the product. You're not going to make a scarf out of 30 micron, but they might make beautiful carpet or rug or dog leash or dryer balls, whatever it ends up being. So there is a market for each of it. I hope that kind of answered the question.
Yes, very much. Transition to our Maddie and Teresa, just on functionality or differences that you see of the fibers, really.
Yeah, so that's a big thing that I kind of focus on with my mill is that education on fiber and on the different wool types. And I actually find that when I give people like the down breed yarns or a swatch of down breed that has been knitted up, they are just in love with the way that it holds stitch definition, that you can wash it in the washing machine because it is resistant to felting. So these like what we consider in the industry lower quality wools really have they have a lot of value. It's just that we're not looking at them in that lens yet. We're still kind of stuck in a different lens. And then I've made a lot of blends with really coarse wool. I mean, what we would consider coarse wool, like the the long wools, the ones that come from border Leicesters and Leicester long wools, put a little bit of alpaca, a little bit of merino in it, and then you've got this really lovely drapey garment that's long lasting and hard wearing. And I'm wearing one right now. I knit this out of yarn I made that's made out of a Leicester long wool and some alpaca. So I think that's a big piece, is that education, the education about the different types of wool and why they're so important, why they're valuable, and not just focusing on, you know, what the industry considers next to skin. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Maddie, I'm sure you have.
I might have 3 cents, 2 cents, 3 cents, 1 cent. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything that Jesse and Teresa have said, and that I think that kind of one of the roles, and I think Jesse, you said this in your part of the presentation, is really helping kind of educate the consumer. Most people are really unfamiliar with like how to talk about textiles and what they're experiencing. And my background is like in textile analysis and like apparel design. So like that is what we talk about. And I think it's odd because we all wear clothing. So like we all have daily engagement with textiles constantly. It's in our interiors. It's what we sleep, you know, in our bed. But helping people find the language and how to engage with that and to kind of dispel a lot of the myths. I mean, I know, like, I think it was somebody in the comments said, you know, kind of that myth that all wool is itchy. You know, and that's so subjective. That's like every green looks the same. It's like, no, like there's a huge spectrum of types of greens. And so I think it's helping people understand that wool is a broad category, and what is next to skin for Teresa might not be next to skin for me, but I need it for mittens when I'm like working outside. So I'm going to be wearing a finer mitten underneath anyway. Like I want the out ones to be thick. I want them to be hardy, maybe have some lanolin in them still, so they're going to like bead the water. Like I want that. Give me those long wools. You know, I don't want a really fine wool because that wouldn't make sense for the purpose. So again, I think helping them understand how to, and someone just dropped it in the chat too, is how to care for things. Because also care is such a huge part of if that's going to feel good long term. Laundry, somebody, an artist I know says that laundry is invisible mending, because if you launder things well, you won't have to do as much mending. So that's, again, another part of educating consumers, is helping familiarize them with these things and how to care for them so they keep feeling good on your body the way that they were meant to be worn. So
Absolutely. And so that's potentially the most exciting thing about fiber, is that there is a use for all of it. And then it's just identifying the people in between to help to get to where we want to be from that standpoint. One of the quick things I'll just drop, and again, Jesse touched on it just a little bit, is care and preparation of the wool. And so I know that wasn't 100% the focus, but when we think about it from a producer standpoint, and again, I'm most, of course, focused on sheep, but we have certainly alpaca operators that have joined us, and several different fibers as well. So I appreciate everybody that's watching this evening and will watch in the future on where they fit into the fiber. But from a shearing of the sheep, you know, one of the things is that it's first off, from a shear standpoint, is making sure that the belly is taken out of that. That's commonly a lot shorter. And then in terms of uniformity, you heard it there best. And Jesse talked about skirting. And when you want to make it to second level, all right, in wool preparation, particularly for those that you want to process, or that individuals may even want to use as hand spinning, even in the grease or in the wool, is that there's that preparation that can and should be accomplished, like taking the legs, the leg wool out, taking the wool cap if they have a wool cap, and making sure that we get to maybe some of the shiniest portions. I would say that investment in a skirting table allows you to get then some of those second cuts out, so that it's not part of the fiber. And again, that would just potentially be washed out. But any quick suggestions from your guys as I hope to lead in there of the discussion, but thoughts for producers that we can make sure that we get just a little bit more uniform wool clip that we can offer.
Yeah, I
I
can
don't
talk quick about that.
Yeah, go for it, Jen. I was gonna just say, like, investing in feeders that are not overhead is
Well done.
key. Yeah, because as they eat, if it comes down and it ends up in their wool, then their wool is full of VM, and we can't mill that out.
Yeah, that's a good one. The animal husbandry definitely has an impact. The cleanliness of it, that's a big part of it. But as far as on a skirting table, I guess one thing we see people, they want to leave it all nice and pretty, like it just came off the sheep. Feel free to pull that thing apart, shake it, get the dust, the sand out of it. That helps a ton. So it doesn't have to look like it just came off the sheep. You can fluff it up. With other fibers, you can, if you tumble it or take some sort of air hose to it between two mesh panels, you can kind of blow some of the dirt out, that sort of thing. With lanolin wools, you don't want to tumble it. You'll just kind of turn it into a sludge or makes it sticky. So that will just make the dirt stick to it. But yeah, fluff it apart, shake it out, get those handfuls of the really bad parts of the neck that are full of chaff and that sort of thing. Just get that out of there.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jesse. Maddie?
I think the only thing I would add to that too is in the same way that there is like wool for every purpose, I think it's okay to maybe be a little aggressive with your skirting and say, like, this is going to be next to skin yarn, or this is going to be yarn that when someone picks it up, they want to go like, this is nice and squishy. And that yarn, like that wool that maybe is like on the verge, could make really good compost or wool pellets or like something else entirely where it doesn't need to be processed. Or Jesse was talking about dryer balls, like maybe just like feel okay with being choosy. And I know someone said in the comments, like having a grader or a sorter come out, or someone who's really proficient at skirting in your area, have them come out and do it with you, and you'll start to see like what they see. Or even a mill, if a mill is doing some sort of day where they invite you to come skirt. I know Teresa does that hands-on kind of see it for yourself. So then you can make choices about setting up the mill to be able to make the best fiber, product for you, best for everybody.
Okay, I'm going to stay on this just a little bit of a question that did come up of is there a hands-on way to learn about the desirable characteristics in a fleece and kind of how those can be better for the animal, and do classes exist? And so I'm going to say that's also, again, connection with those that are part of our industry. And so when you think about it from if I consider myself a fiber producer, is going to those locations that are either providing either end product or the processor. One of the things in lots of different places is that there are wool shows or exhibitions as well. And, the most famous one, in my personal opinion, is the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, but there's lots of them across the stages. And so when I got the chance to go to the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival and they said, cool, and it was my sister and I say, go ahead, now go sort the 600 fleeces. And so you talk about the differences in characteristics. The other thing that I know, and this is a kind of a fun part of it, is that the more you know, the more you don't know. And I'm fine with that, because the things that you may consider highly important may not be the things that the next person that wants to purchase yours may consider. Because I like, my family has Cordell sheep, and so I like the big power, bold crimp of a 27 micron. That isn't exactly what Jessie wanted, because she said she wanted 20 to 25 microns to do some of those. But some may want the real bright color. Also, there's lots of natural colored fibers and fleeces that come from those that people may want that more natural one, because then we don't need the dye, right? And then also some may, from a softness standpoint, keep that in consideration. So from a quality standpoint, big picture of color, crimp, and handle are some of the things that can be beneficial. And then from a objective standpoint, it's more on the fiber diameter, because in our initial discussion, We talked about where those products can go in functionality, that the finer fibers can be closer to the skin, and then more of those durable fibers, like Maddie said, would be needed for the external part of the mittens. And so, again, that from that functionality, one of the things that the American Sheep Industry Association does, and we have a class at North Dakota State University in Hettinger, is a certified wool classers school. Now that focuses more so on the commercial industry of shearing, 100 to 500 or whatever that number is per day. But that does provide the option. And as I try to bring that together from our next of line for our artisan wools, is really know who the next producer is, again, because I've seen some of the most beautiful fleeces and some of the ones that were potentially, Teresa, subpar. And so people pick those as well. And so identifying where that value is, it's all in the eye of the beholder of what they want to do. And so, sorry, that was a vague answer on my end of what the difference is on value and or character traits. If you have anything to add, I will let you, but I will also task. Oh, Teresa, do you have anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, so I think one other thing for shepherds, if you're really interested in breaking into like a market where you're selling your fleeces direct to spinners and fiber artists, your best thing to do is to go and sit with those groups, and they will teach you everything, because most hand spinners know so much about wool, it's ridiculous. And they're great at educating.
Absolutely. Okay, I have one that's not particularly byproducts, but it kind of is, and we didn't really touch on it, and I think that maybe we should. And so there was a question in terms of just catching some of the lanolin. We talked about the wool. See, Maddie's like, yeah, all right. What about, is there anything in terms of keeping the lanolin? And we talked about wool balls and scarves and socks and along that way. But another thing that's came up is the pelleting of wool as well. And so that's not at all the places, but man, I certainly get some questions as well. And so even from mulch or the wool pellets. And so I just want to call this topic byproducts and open it up to my trio.
I'll just do my little quick piece about lanolin, and then I'm happy to pass it to both of you to talk about pellets and things like that, and also your thoughts on that. The biggest thing that I found is that when we did like the mill inventory survey, and I talked to wools, you can see where my brain is, it's getting late. We talked to mills all across the country, and one of the things that really impeded capturing the lanolin was needing special equipment in order to basically siphon that out of the water, and then it needs to be purified, and all the equipment that would need is just so like its own industry, right? Like a miller is milling and making yarn and roving and batting and all these things, and lanolin almost needs to be, it's like a side, another business partnering with that mill, that's the milling infrastructure they're bringing to the table. And that's definitely not to say like, again, I think this is where this bigger piece of infrastructure with like the farm bill and things like that could be really awesome, because there's people who want organic, natural beauty products, and lanolin could play a huge role in that. I mean, some of my favorite products are lanolin. They're pretty much just lanolin, especially for like when it's dry and cold. And a lot of us live in dry and cold places. So that one, I'd love to see some people starting to pair and be like, hey, we'll bring our equipment and we'll set it up, and that would be great. So that's my thoughts on lanolin. But Teresa and Jesse, I'm sure you have thoughts on some of those other ones too.
Yeah, so I'll just quick touch on the wool pellet and the science behind that. So when wool is pelletized, where it's chopped up really small and it's introduced into the soil, it's a slow release of 12% nitrogen over 6 months. It also repels slugs, it retains moisture, and it has potash and potassium. It's just the best fertilizer that you could ever introduce into your soil while you're tilling and preparing it for the growing season. there are a lot of wool pelletizers now in Wisconsin. It seems like that kind of there was some funding that happened there, and people got some pelletizing machines. I think that's fantastic. I'd love to see this become something that isn't just something that market gardeners know about, but that can be rolled out to big agricultural businesses. And then there are other byproducts that I think we'll explore in the next couple of years, like landscape fabric, sponges, Band-Aids. There's so many cool things, but we just have to get there. We don't have the infrastructure yet. And Jesse, you take it.
Yeah, one thing I just want to caution on wool pellets is we don't have all the research yet as far as heavy metals, the uptake into wool being a heavy metal and then concentrating it into something that might be food. So just be cautious about that. Maybe with flowers and other plants that are not edible might be better, but the research is still out there on some of that, or there is a potential for more research in that market. For lanolin, that too, we've had that question, and it's a cost thing, it's a infrastructure thing, be able to take that water when you're washing wool and to be able to spin it out, some sort of centrifuge, I believe is what's involved, and then the cleaning it and purifying it. It's very expensive and time consuming. So yeah, I think most mills, it would have to be some sort of partnership as far as being able to save that lanolin, and then trying to pull all the dirt out. It becomes tough.
Thank you. Thanks. That's certainly at least some exciting things, even when we think about it of, hey, particularly Jesse, like with your billboard there, right? With the yarn of factory of making that, but so many different things can and could be used from the fibers just in generality. And so we've touched on again preparation and skirting, and we've touched on the process and connecting the dots. And Jesse, I really appreciated kind of some of the economics that you brought to some of our products and adding that in. And again, you've heard that Maddie and Teresa helped to put an idea of where that fits on our Minnesota economy for our wool producers. And again, everybody connects the dots, and that's what's so fun. And you heard again of the people along the chain of know the people, no matter where you're at on this fiber supply chain, is identify the people behind you in the supply chain of where you're getting that product and the people in front of you, because it is interesting. And so identifying what they want, whether it is from an artisan standpoint, or of course I have some wool, 100% wool man brooches that I use so that I don't have to wear a name tag, so that they just know that I'm the sheep extension specialist. And so those happen of whether they're full garments or accessories or wool dryer balls and everything in between. So this is the exciting thing as we think about it again from our focus on sheep and goats, but also again including alpacas and lots of fiber producing animals. And so my last question there is just a quick summary from all of our trio of colleagues here on your quick bullet there of connecting the dots of our fiber supply chain, and just some closing thoughts, because we've had a tremendous group of participants, and we really appreciate everybody joining us and people that will watch this. And I'm excited that this was our topic. But if you kindly would, how do we get there and connect those dots just ever so slightly and make this a better process for the fiber industry? I'm going to allow it to be in the order that so fits for you, and grab it, and appreciate everybody for joining us.
All right, so I think kind of in closing, the big thing is getting out there, seeing what's in your area, reaching out to someone who you think might know more than you. So if you're a producer of small flock, look to see if fiber mills in your area, reach out to your breed associations, go to some of the different area events that you might see, and just start to kind of say hello to people, connect some dots, and reach out to them and get more information, see if you can find a class, or if they're willing to sit down and help you. As a fiber mill, we get a lot of farms that ask for help. We try to help them with skirting, help with maybe our area sees different products than theirs, but just kind of getting that your foot in the door and getting started starting to process. And like I kind of touched on earlier, even if you're only doing a handful of your animals and trying to get it into some sort of finished product or even yarn and starting there, you'll also learn a lot along the way. And that will help you with your breeding program, whether you're looking at the genetics and the nutrition into your fiber. Being able to see what you're producing in an end product will help you throughout the entire step as raising these animals for fiber production.
Yeah, I think in closing too, for me, bouncing off what Jesse said, get to know everybody in your area, really live with, like, spend your money on fine wool garments. You know, the more that you are invested in it, the more that others will invest in it as well. And ask questions, try to figure out how we can make the system better in the States.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, I think collaborate is really the best way to do this. A rising tide floats all boats, and that is no more truer than for the domestic wool economy. So any way that you can plug in with, you know, a farmers union, or if there is a sheep and wool organization in your area, or a fiber shed chapter, or as Teresa was saying before, like Minnesota has a super rich history and a wide variety of guild systems. So like handcraft guilds. So like the Weavers Guild, which has like a huge spinning community, and all these books and information and people who will say, this is not what I want to spin. And you go, great, we won't spin it that way then. Just reach out, go to fiber festivals. You're gonna meet all of those folks. And I feel like every person that I've really talked to has really been open and willing to share. And I think that that openness is part of, because we know we depend on each other to create thriving systems. So just keep connecting, and yeah, good luck to everybody.
Thank you very much. And as we think about it, again, from a raw wool standpoint and draw that together, I want to appreciate all of our presenters, but our wool, at least on the raw standpoint, has not been the most shiny, particularly from our medium and strong wools. So the fine wools have held its own in some places, but also those that are sheep or wool producers, is that you can work with your FSA office and to potentially get for ungraded wool 40 cents a pound as a bonus. And so if you keep the pounds and the weights, and again, our job is not to identify that 40 cents plus the 10 cents of its value is the end. And that's why we included talented individuals here to provide some ideas of how we can move forward to the next step of processing, making artisan fibers and artisan products that can kind of fit for us. So appreciate those that have joined us, and please fill out the summary for us. We will have our next function will be April 29th. So thriving through drought, regenerative grazing strategies for sheep and goats. And so if you stay with us, you can join us. These are all available when we get them accomplished on our YouTube page for the University of Minnesota Sheep and Goat Extension Team. Some of my colleagues have joined us as well and helped to put this on. Ms. Colleen Carlson has joined us, Brenda Miller, and also Sabrina Florentino. And so as myself, Dr. Travis Hoffman, of pulling some of this information together, we'd love to work with you and help in both Minnesota, where we're driven to discover, and at North Dakota State University, where we extend knowledge and change lives. And so again, appreciate our talented presenters and the great interactive discussion that we've had in our chat room as well. So thanks for joining us on March 14th, 2024. Live the dream and make sure to eat American lamb and wear American wool. Have a good evening.